Nikos Tsivikis is a researcher at the Foundation of Research and Technology Hellas in Crete. He leads since 2021 as principal investigator the project Byzantine Agricultural Landscape Across the Aegean that studies in a comparative context the evolution of agricultural productive landscapes in both Greece and Asia Minor. His research focused on the evolution of Byzantine cities and social relationships as expressed in the built and unbuilt environment. Recently, he has moved to the interaction of urban site and rural landscapes. At the same time, he leads an international research team at Amorium in Central Anatolia in collaboration with the Turkish authorities, focusing on early medieval Byzantium and urban transformation. He has led research and teaching postdoctoral positions in institutions in both Europe and United States, North America. He has published papers in English, Greek, and Turkish, and he will publish in next months a monograph entitled Urban Transformation, Christianization, and Ruralization in Late Antique Peloponnese, the Case of Byzantine Messene. Thank you very much, Nikos.
Thank you. Thank you all for inviting me. So let me first thank the organizers, and especially Pilar and Manuel, for inviting me to this great workshop. I apologize for my Spanish being non-existent, but certainly after here it will be much more, much richer. So when I saw the lineup, I was truly excited to share some of my ideas with you and this set of great scholars, among the names like Lauro, who I've heard many times before. Actually, I'm happy that I managed to come since this Monday, while moving my office, I got this very, very, very difficult back. So even the doctor said, maybe you shouldn't travel. But I said, okay, I mean, we're archaeologists after all. Anyhow, I have been used to treating discussions about late antique and early medieval Iberia as something of an exotic enjoyment when in larger conferences, when looking things from the other side of the Mediterranean. Now I understand the feeling, as it is my paper here that is the exotic, in some ways, material. So I believe that although the historical questions might be different between the two land masses that frame the Mediterranean, Iberia and Asia Minor, the processes are quite interestingly similar and offer us a lot to think about. And actually, the end of these two stories, the Arabic conquest, in these two faraway parts, connect nicely to, as you will see, to our material. So, having heard of our discussion last day, I've decided to change a bit my presentation and offer a more structured introduction on the various subjects concerning Asia Minor or Anatolia. I will use it interchangeably, and the site of Amorium that I am working at. So, in some ways, our story touches upon some of the last days of this unified Roman Mediterranean, at least in its Byzantine version, to a certain degree during the Justinianic reconquest of the West, that you all well know, and it expands to a period of crisis that will guide the Eastern Roman Empire through its early Middle Ages, leading it away from late antiquity into what we would call early Middle Ages. But here, in a different way, without the breakdown of Roman institutions, at least to this hybrid style that they will acquire in the Byzantine Empire. In the center of the discussion stands a city, Amorium, a city in the middle of the Anatolian plain, you see, landlocked a bit like these cities here in the center and north of Spain, far away from the sea. It's almost 600 kilometers every way to go to the sea, being on important land routes. Amorium was a typical and non-assuming Roman city of Asia Minor, among hundreds of them, with a streamlined and logical evolution. I'm just giving some points. Late antique city, becoming a small bishopric, having some structures being built, occasionally visited by local saints. The difference is that a great change comes from the 7th century on, when, through the great crisis that the Byzantine Empire goes through, and while most of the cities of the Eastern Mediterranean seem to collapse or disappear, Amorium becomes more and more important into what I believe and I have claimed to be a new type of a city. Amorium, in this way, will play, maybe by a turn of fortune, maybe planned ahead, it's not very easy to say, an important role in the administrative reorganization of the Eastern Roman Empire, with the introduction of the thematic institution. The thema is these local administrative units that take place after the collapse of the eastern frontier with the Islamic expansion. So we have a completely new militarized organization of the Roman state with these large units and at their head a person, a strategos, a general, a military official rather than a civic administrative personnel. It was also that Amorium was on an important land route, one that in late antiquity didn't attract much of an interest, as everything was moved much easier through the Mediterranean. But in this period of crisis from the 7th century on, with the presence of the Arabs all over the Eastern and Western Mediterranean soon, inland movement becomes paramount, as also this is the main movement for the army units that are traveling from Constantinople to face the Caliphate, or even from for Arab forces coming from the southeast towards Constantinople. As the entire of Asia Minor becomes the theater of an ongoing confrontation between the Caliphate and the Byzantines, Amorium plays a new role somewhere in the center of these maps. You see the constant attacks of the 7th and 8th century and also the attacks of the 9th century. The question that rises is about these Arab raids. We see a very interesting, maybe different pattern we are not yet able to fully understand. It's not a pattern of conquest, but it's a pattern of raiding. According to some scholars, the inability of the Caliphate to conquer Asia Minor might have been, at least in the early days, one of the main reasons that actually the Umayyads turned their interest to the west and to Spain as a new frontier, or maybe an easier adversary against the Visigoths. Through this process, coming back to Asia Minor, Amorium is oftenly attacked by the Arabs and occasionally even destroyed, as some of our sources often mention. The importance of this new type of a city can be shown in another way. Actually, all of the 9th century, in the throne of Constantinople, sits a dynasty that originates from Amorium, the famous Amorian dynasty. What are these guys? These are actually very strong and important military personnel, local, that can command the army and then claim the throne. So they're usurpers of some type, giving us an idea of how the city and the army that is based in the city can play an important role on the main space of the empire. Actually, it is in the middle of the 9th century, in the summer of 838, that we know that during one of the last such sieges, such raids into Asia Minor and attacks, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutasim sets siege and finally sacks the city of Amorium, destroying it, becoming a major event, one of the most prominent events in Arab history of the 9th century, one of the greatest victories, and also it occupies a huge role, a huge position in the Byzantine textual sources, and it's very well portrayed in the manuscript of Skylitzis that it's not so far away from here, kept in the National Library of Madrid. Still, this important event for us archaeologically, because as we will see, we have been able to trace the material impact of the destruction of 838, was not enough to stop the urban evolution of the site, as the city is rebuilt in the 10th and 11th century realities as part of the reorganized Byzantine Empire of the Great Reconquest or the Great Renaissance, having been victorious over the Arabs in Eastern Mediterranean. The destruction layer of 838 that has been explored across the site, and I'm showing you just a small pic of material culture, provides important information on the 9th century, on the moment of its destruction, but also of the way that the city looked just before, going all the way to the 8th, maybe the late 7th century. And of course, all kinds of dramatical material. I mean, if you're interested into drama, please join us. Well dated, the destruction layer, well dated on rich and ample coin finds, and you see just a small selection of bronze coins from the destruction layer of types that are quite uncommon in Byzantine sites, even in Byzantine archaeology, even in Anatolia, much more in other places. And actually, it's very interesting because you can see on the ones on the right, the face of Theophilus. So Theophilus is the emperor during the time of the sack of the city. But Theophilus was born in Amorium while his father was serving as a general. So there is this quite interesting, once again, dramatic moment. But it does not only limit to Byzantine material culture, but occasionally we are able to see also parts of Arabic material culture that offers information on the realities of the conquest and the raid in the area. So how can we codify some basic perceptions of urbanity in a site like that? Let me start temporally, and we can already see in sources like this late 6th century Greek Vita of St. Theodore of Sicyon, a very important local saint, information about the city when he visits the city, and with lots of movement. I'm not going to read the text. He comes to the city, he goes inside in a litany from the city walls to the cathedral, and from there he leaves to go outside the city, and he travels outside the city, where to an estate of an important local elite, an illustrious called Anastasios, that has a mansion, that has a private church. So it gives us a first idea of this expanded urban space. There is a city, a late antique city, but there are all these functionings happening just around. Space is porous. The saint can come in and out. The main signifier in the discussion by the saint is by now the creation of a solid fortification, and you can see the line of the fortification in our plan and a bit in our satellite image. Although it has not been excavated everywhere, we can establish the line of the fortification. A defense that is being created for the first time in the late 5th or early 6th century during the Emperor Zeno or Emperor Anastasius, probably as part of a Byzantine military interest in the east, towards the east, towards the Sasanians first. I mean, they didn't know what will soon happen. But for our discussion, it is this creation of the fortifications that for the first time defines solidly what is inside and what is outside the urbs. So a tactical choice, a military choice comes also to comment on the uses of space. As for what is supposed to be inside the urbs, the city, of course, coming back to the saint's life, we hear about the main cathedral. Probably we have excavated it. This is this great three-aisled basilica with a very interesting story later on. But also outside the walls, a network of villages in this fertile plain of northern Sakaria. You see there is this plain that is framed by mountains to the north and to the south. And a number of small settlements have been pinpointed during our survey or survey from neighboring sites. The same view from the south. I just want to show how the plain seems to be populated by smaller villages in this that provide late antique material up to the 6th century, or even more fascinating examples like this very nice inscription of an illustrious of a different name. This is Ammianus the Illustrious, that comes from a village nearby, Amorium, probably from the local estate or the local town controlled by an estate of a 6th century Illustrious, much like the person who appears in the Vita. This kind of buildings is difficult to find archaeologically, but still we've been trying to trace them. So again, it's not very helpful if you see on the right side the satellite map of Amorium, and outside the walls, recently we have located through satellite imagery what seems like a major outside suburban construction, maybe an estate, maybe a monastery. It's kind of a canonical rectangular courtyard with something in the middle, waiting to be explored, if ever. By the 9th century, going forth, from the 6th to the 9th century, the period that we're interested in, at the peak of the Arab Age, everything seems to have changed. The city now is a fortress, is, of course, interestingly enough, a populous fortress, staging army, war machines, productive facilities, but nonetheless a fortress. In another hagiographical text, now the 9th century, describing the martyrium of the 42 saints of Amorium. The 42 saints of Amorium were these elite soldiers, administrators that were captured by the Arabs during the 838 destruction and put to death in Samarra 5 years later, in Syria, in Iraq. So these texts appear written in the mid-9th century and describe the city. And they describe the city in its qualities as a fortress. I mean, actually mentioning that it's a useless fortress. It's not very well fortified. Thus, Everything now, the entire life is organized along the fortifications, along the walls. The lower city walls, you can see them still visible in our leader model, and the upper city fortification. All of it built earlier in the 6th century, but still being in use in the 7th and 8th century, defining space. And quite interestingly, this is the fortifications that were used to repel the Arab attacks. So it's also good to have in mind that although we are discussing responses in the 8th and 9th century, all these are based on 6th century infrastructure, often updated, and some of our destruction layer images from one of the fortification towers near the western city gate. So what is engulfed in these walls? And is it urban anymore in the 8th and 9th century? I opt for this new term that it's very in fashion today of urban space, bridging, also in some ways our discussion about suburbia and proper urbs. The best example, a very interesting example that partially has been published, and you can also access it, is the story of wine production inside the city during the 7th to 9th century. This is a story about productive facilities, sophisticated wine producing installation, some of them wine presses of the Vitruvian type, and some of them just grape trading floors that have been excavated almost everywhere inside the walled lower city in the destruction layer of 838. It seems that wherever we excavate, more than 11 such installations have been found. Wherever we excavate in the lower city, what we find in houses, in churches, outside of the houses, is wine presses everywhere. Their discovery tells us a lot about the continuous use of sophisticated Roman technology of agricultural production. No? Things that we are used and things that we usually discuss for the suburban space, even in late antiquity, and also about the possibility of the city to invest in these technologies, probably in order to respond to high demand for wine regionally. The density of the production network is quite astonishing, as I'm showing you. Here, an entire neighborhood, one of our best excavated neighborhoods of the 8th, 9th century, was dedicated seasonally. I mean, wine production takes only a couple of months per year, to industrial scale wine production. And more such installations have been found even inside ecclesiastical premises or open spaces, as mentioned. And I'm giving you an artistic reconstruction of this central neighborhood. This allows us to envisage life in the city, but still we have to answer why all these installations appear inside the fortified area in the 8th century. Why precious urban space, or at least this is how we are trained to understand it in the in late antique archaeology, is dedicated to processes like this. Is it a completely new introduction of production? I mean, we haven't found any 6th century such such installations, or were all these relocated from areas outside the walls, inside the protected space for reasons of insecurity, 8th century Arab raids coming the first in mind. This production seems likely part of a boom, of an economical boom at the city. You can see one of these the wine presses installed in, I mean, not in, but to a room just next to the cathedral. The technology itself means a considerable investment, first for creating them, but also for sustaining them. You need constant presence of highly trained personnel, of material like timber to keep these things going, oil or some kind of lubricant. You certainly need a high demand for these products that can sustain the investment. The intensity of production that we just saw, interestingly enough, once again, contrasts the known paleo-environmental data. So I'm a big discussion, huge discussion currently for all of us, also in Anatolia, in Asia Minor, and I'm showing you a very straightforward pollen diagram in the center about Central Anatolia. Of course, it gives these prices of almost nothing being grown in the 7th, 8th, 9th century. The interesting thing is that in the city that we are excavating, it seems that exactly this period that on the pollen tends to be invisible is the growth as never seen before. Maybe because of archaeological visibility, as Laura was saying yesterday, maybe the urban space is much, much more visible than anything else, maybe. And of course, large production creates questions about the entire economic cycle surrounding these processes. I'm showing you another 9th century urban house. I mean, if I didn't say it's an urban house, one would say that it looks completely like a rural estate or a rural mansion, full of these storage pithoi. So what is going on generally? I mean, this is one mansion that has more than 12 or 14 pithoi. Its storage is quite a lot. Is it private houses? Is it the entire process centrally directed? Is it socially stratified? Certainly extending domain consumption and hinting us for something else. And once again, you see the way that storage is organized, at least in one of these houses. And I repeat, everything is defined, burned under the destruction layer of 838 with people burned and various funny things going on. But if we examine the material that I'm presenting here in full contextuality, in the ideal conditions offered by the destruction layer, we can even sharper our questions about how rural, as I would prefer to call it, space is being treated. In exactly the same example, in the rooms of the house, from where all these pithy with the expansive storage, in the destruction layer, I'm showing you just a collection of finds, different finds that all together, they probably were parts of a kit, of a weighing kit or a recording kit. You see a stylus for recording, glass weights for coin weights, scales, much like these nice finds that we now have from 9th century Constantinople. You see how it was supposed to look, a kit like that, I mean, with its wooden box. So, collecting, producing, collecting, making the wine or other foodstuff, recording, distributing. How can this be reflected if we just cross? I mean, are these fortifications a true barrier? So this is part of another project that I'm combining. This is one of our newest projects. In an effort to understand the rural hinterland, the suburban space, we attempted first to understand the urban organization of space. So we believe that we can trace in this red the still existing, even in the 9th century, cannabis grid of the city. And how does this help us? It helps us that when we try to analyze the historical landscape just outside our city, One of our tools have been we're plotting these polygons of the modern plots and fields. There is a consistency in a number of these plots that corresponds to the orientation, the original orientation of the city. And this, if you also see our histogram, in certain areas, make them suspects of a possible also historical content in their formation. Among them, we have focused in a special group of agricultural plots that they seem to be organized on sides of paths that correspond also to the gates of the city, yes, corresponding to the gates of the city, and the main characteristic being these strip fields, these elongated fields that we know from the Western Middle Ages as and Western Central medieval settings as suitable for arable land and cereal. And based on that, I don't want to tire you, we try to propose a general model of possible, it's very difficult, of course, to date anything, of possible agricultural land that has been organized during this period. It has certain characteristics, the strip fields. It has characteristics like middle-scale property as opposed to large-scale properties that we know from Roman lands. It also, and you can see it in this image, it also, there is evidence of plenty of barriers and field borders that have been derelict for generations. These predate Ottoman use in the space, as we have an idea of how Ottoman land is organized, and possibly we can even understand how immediately outside the city we have at least two different types of crops, cereal crops and vineyards further near the foothills of the mountain, maybe corresponding to the wine production that we just saw. Okay, let's stop here. In my presentation today, I have attempted to show that, at least in our case, in this exotic Roman situation in the East, the division between urban and suburban space is more than just a spatial arrangement. It is a choice often dictated by the historical events and the change of functions. Urban roles can be found in late antique suburbia, while rural functions occupy most of what is the early medieval proper city. What are we to think about all this when we are dealing with this material? The questions are much more than our answers, but still we are in this effort to collect the data presented here. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for three illuminating presentations. Pilar, if you don't mind, I have one question for each participant. For Francisco, it's a very specific question. It's about the chronology of the glass production center in the necropolis area. So when does it start, and do we know when it starts and when it ends? For Nikos, looking at these wine production areas, I started thinking about Caroline Goodson's book, Cultivating the City in the early medieval Italy, and her argument that these gardens within the city are parts of family identity. It's not just an economic unit, but it's a whole social institution. And I was wondering, because with wine production, one tends to think, right, this is very attached to family, like aristocratic households, right, production. And I wonder if there's a dimension of family identity in the construction of these wine productions areas within the city. That once you start building one, there's sort of a competition, intra-elite competition, to emulate their peers. And for Enrico, when you made that comment about that G20 meeting in Ravenna, I was thinking all these aristocrats might have come with their entourages, right? With a large number of people, which makes more sense to stay outside the city walls than inside the city walls. But also these are armed entourages, like people with weapons. And I wonder if, in general, more generally, the presence of aristocrats outside the city is not just a decision of the aristocrats, but also a push from the city dwellers to keep people with weapons outside the city walls. They could be very useful during wartime, but during peacetime, it's better to keep them outside. Thank you.
So, Francisco, please.
Bien, puedo contestar en español, a ver si consigo. Hablabas de los de fuera de la ciudad, ¿no? Es que tenemos fuera de la ciudad y en zonas que estaban también abandonadas en la ciudad, en los edificios de espectáculos también tienen estructuras, como yo dije, que fueron abandonadas en el cuarto y ocupados. Esencialmente, las fechas son entre lo quinto y lo siete que tenemos esos centros de producción. Después, no. No sé si tienes algo.
Enrique? No, Nikos, sorry.
No, yes, thank you very much. So regarding the wine making process, you're right, and this is something to consider. So it seems that all our installations, they are part of a household, and we can archaeologically construct how these early medieval houses, I mean, these would be the ground floors or semi-basements, and on top of it there would be a mud brick upper floor where the living quarters, one or two floors, probably one, would have been. So actually, during excavation, what we find is all the possessions of the house having fallen inside these basements. Our idea so far has been based on the thing that most of them, they are wine presses of this press and screw type, this Vitruvian style. And the thing is that these are a considerable investment, so it's much more, I mean, we believe much more than to serve the household needs. Generally, what we know from late antiquity about this kind of wine presses, we can say or we can estimate the production, and the idea to invest and make this is because you use it constantly. There's also another technical feature, might be too special, but in this late antique winemaking, a big discussion is about the pressing vats and the collection vats. So usually in smaller scale production, you would have larger collecting vats because the grape juice would stay there for a week or two, according to the rules. The problem, in our case, it's very small because immediately it's been transferred to somewhere else. So we have tried to estimate a possible production based on the size and based on this number of days, and we believe that there is an opportunity going on. So we're going back to the economy, that for some reasons may be connected with the geostrategical, the reorganization of the administration. And what happens, I mean, there is a nice article on that. It seems that from the mid-7th century, the army of the East moves, I mean, the defeated army of the East, after the Arab defeat, moves from Judea, Palestine, Syria, to a more area of Amorium. And maybe this army needs to be fed, needs to be provided with wine. And all this wine used to come up to the 6th century, up to the Arab conquest from Gaza and from those areas. So new areas are being now trained to produce. So we believe there is this opportunity, and you're true, all these are private ones. So probably the private sector comes and invests to tap on this income, secured by bots from the state. That's the thing. Maybe. Thank you.
Ah, bravo. So now I don't have. I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I mean that aristocracy were living outside the city. In fact, Lombard aristocracy are supposed by Paolo Diacono to live outside. This, I guess, is an excuse that he used because the city was destroyed by Avars. So he say, well, it's like this because the Lombards were outside the city. But in fact, what I guess is that they didn't care where they had to decide from inside or outside the city. And the city is not considered only the city inside the city walls, but also a wide conception. It depends from the orography or where is considered a city. So in fact, this is what I believe. I'm not sure it's like this. I want to discuss with you this. But in fact, in city like Ravenna, where with all the river, the lagoons, the valleys, in fact, the 1 mile all around the city is impossible to maintain because in fact there's sea and all that stuff. So it's a wider construction. And also, if it's 4 kilometers by the city walls, the suburbs of class becomes in fact part of what was considered the same city. But after, as it's also considered by the citizen of class, become a total new city, with is a numerus, so it's exercitus of classiaris, not in the same, but it happens after the 5th and 6th century. At the beginnings, they were considered the same unity. And I guess it was impossible for the Roman law, also in the 6th century, to move arms inside. But time changes and possibly it's different later, but we don't have evidence.
I have a question considering what we were discussing yesterday with Lauro and Damian. And it's something about that you have just said, but this question is more for you. Do you think it's possible to calculate or to make an approximation of the size of the suburbium of Amorium or Braga? Because in some way Enrico answered about that, but I would like to know your opinion about this possibility to calculate, or if you think that is impossible in the current situation of the knowledge.
Well, in the case of Braga, it's not very easy because, as I told you, the specific characteristics of the growth of the city doesn't allow to have
Make an approximation or no?
Not very easy. You know the existence. We know the area approximate from where we think there are remains of those periods, but we don't. We can't perceive in all that area if it was a continuous or if the specific differences.
The continuity is impossible to see if there is a continuity.
Yes, we could do that approximation, calculating the area of the sites that we know that exist. But as we don't know the specific characteristics, we cannot assure that it's a continuous or not.
And Nikos, in your case?
Again, it's very difficult, and we don't have much of that evidence. I mean, what we can definitely comment upon is that it seems that the suburban or the suburban uses, let's say better, are more visible in late antique times, and then in the early Middle Ages, contrary to the general narrative, we have a concentration in the city, maybe for security reasons. So the most densely populated time of the city is the 7th and 8th century. We see it inside and we see what's happening immediately outside. And then when maybe the great threat ceases to exist from the 10th century on, then again the country land becomes much more populated and everything is much more evident outside the city.
Please, Sabine. One moment, Sabine, because they will give you a microphone.
Just one question concerning Braga. you classified Dume as a monastery. What are the arguments right now? Because so far as I know, it's not so already decided that there has been a monastery, or yes?
Well, the documental sources seems to make us assume that Dum is a monastery or could be a monastery. And we have a confirmed cult building and the occupation of spaces. Not entirely the plan of Dum, but crossing those data, I think at least we can assume the hypothesis of being a monastery. To us, no. You don't think it is a monastery?
But it's a hypothesis.
Yes, it's an hypothesis, of course. Of course.
Okay, thank you.